So it's important that we show and show our appreciation of Dr. Anderson by reading the chapters on the book, Ron Ritchart's Cultures of Thinking book, Creating Cultures of Thinking. So again, this is an outstanding book. It really guides our thinking about how schools should look. For those folks who are not in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we're going to gear this conversation specifically to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. However, anyone, I know that we have members in other parts of the world, so if you want to chime in and give context outside of KSU, or KSA rather, KSA, then feel free to do so. Let's dive into the chapter, Cultures of Thinking. Chapter 2 deals specifically with expectation. And that is an important topic as it relates to how we go about the business of schools. What are expectations? So for a second, let's just think about what expectations are. And again, you can think about this. You can type this up in your chat area, in the chat area at the bottom of the BioGo screen, or you can just think about it. How do you define expectations as a educator, as a teacher? How do you define expectations? What are expectations to you, and why are they important? So let's just think about that for a second. Why are expectations important? Are they important as a teacher, as an educator? Are they important to our students, to our learners? What are expectations? So Ritchart defines expectations as a set of strong beliefs surrounding future outcomes and anticipated results. Let's try that again. A set of strong beliefs surrounded by in the idea of future outcomes and anticipated results. So as an educator, we think about expectations and what we expect from our students. It's the compass, if you will. It's the GPS. It's the Google Maps of the coordinates of where we want our students to be by the end of the class day, the instructional day, by the end of the instructional week, by the end of the semester, by the end of the school year. It's what we expect for our students. Now, there's several ways, 2 ways basically, we can think about expectations. And we can think about expectations from the standpoint of behavior expectations, and then we can look at expectations from the standpoint of intellectual or knowledge-based expectations. So, obviously we expect our students to behave and not talk in class and be respectful of the other students. And then we also have other expectations which we want our students to learn and have an understanding of knowledge of what we present. And that's kind of the crux of the chapter, is this idea of versus learning versus understanding, or knowledge versus understanding. So that's the crux of this conversation, knowledge versus understanding. Why is that important that we differentiate knowledge versus understanding? And I think it's very important as it relates to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, really as it relates to anywhere, any school, regardless of the location. But here in Saudi Arabia, there's a heavy emphasis placed on knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge, students acquiring knowledge. And we have to ask ourselves as educators, is that what we really want? Do we really want to focus on students acquiring knowledge? Or do we want our students to understand? and have deep understanding, have authentic understanding, have understanding that is personalized. So I'll pose the question to you. How do you engage your students as it relates to thinking? How do you get them to think? And again, you can think about that. If you want to type it in the comment section, just go ahead and do that. But how do you get your students to think? How do you go about, what processes do you use as it relates to thinking? What system, what processes, what methods do you use when you think? How do you promote thinking in your classrooms? And maybe the question before that is, do you promote thinking? Do you have the time? Some people tell me, I don't have the time. I have to get through the chapters. I have to get through the book. There's pacing. So do you have time to really focus on this idea of thinking while you're teaching? So how do we go about doing that? So if you read the chapter, the author talks to us about a teacher that he observed named Karen. And he tells us that he was really excited about observing Karen's class because Karen was in several workshops prior, and Karen was very, he talked about thinking and metacognition and all these things that, us nerdy teachers get excited about as it relates to teaching. And when he went into her classroom to observe her, he was kind of disappointed. So we're going to talk about this idea of working class. That's a very good point, working class. And we're going to talk about some of what that means. But in Karen's case, he was extremely disappointed because what he found, although Karen did a great job in managing her class, although she did a great job in managing her class, she did not do such a hot job in promoting thinking. And he talks about this in the chapter. So a lot of times, and I've seen this a lot. Teachers think they're outstanding because they can get their students to be quiet, or they can engage their students in work and completing tasks. And we have to understand that teaching and learning is not about completing tasks. It's not about doing a series of tasks. That is not teaching, nor is it learning. We do not learn from doing a series of tasks from an academic standpoint. We just don't learn that way, and that's not a true pedagogical approach. So, as teachers, we have to ask ourselves about this idea of expectations. What expectations do I have of my students? Because expectations really drive how you teach your students. It really drives. So basically, Ritchart tells us there's two types of expectations that we have. We have directives, okay, and that's don't talk in class. I need you to do your homework. I need you to write two paragraphs. Each paragraph should be 100 words. These are directives that we ask students to do. So we have teachers who master that craft of who set expectations based on directives. Okay, I need you to be quiet. I need you to work with one another. I need you to make sure you clean up under your desk. I need you to I need you to do a series of things. So the teacher as a taskmaster, okay, that's directives. And if you read the chapter, Karen was excellent at being a taskmaster. And often we really get excited about teachers who are taskmasters because it's productive. It seems like the students are doing something, they're following, they're paying attention to her, they're paying exact attention to her, and we look at her, or we look at him, the taskmaster teacher, and we say, wow, they're very effective, they're very productive. However, is that taskmaster teacher promoting thinking? So from an expectation standpoint, from an expectation standpoint, we really have to ask ourselves, does being a taskmaster, having students do a series of tasks, is that learning? And as from my perspective, from my 17 years of doing this, I'm going to say no. That's not learning. That's being a taskmaster. However, we reward and we congratulate these teachers who are taskmasters because of this idea that Zarin just mentioned, this idea of working, being a production. We can visually see productivity, but just because you can visually see productivity does not necessarily mean that learning is taking place. So we have one expectation, which is directives, the expectation of directives, and then we have another expectation, which is the expectation of beliefs. Okay, and the beliefs are what we believe that teachers should have as it relates to teaching thinking, as it relates to promoting a culture of thinking, promoting an environment where students are free to muse and think. And these teachers, they have a belief system. They expect their students to be thinkers. So although good teachers give clear directives, and so I'm not going to knock giving the act of giving a clear direction. I talk about this in my TESOL course a lot, that good teachers give clear directions. You give clear instructions. However, that is not the crux of your belief system, of just being able to be a taskmaster and giving clear directives. Teachers really do something more spiritual, more internal, which is promote this idea of thinking by these belief systems that really guide our actions. What about expectations based on beliefs on direct actions? So basically, we want in our teaching, we want our teaching to be student driven. So when we're taskmasters, we're not being student driven, we're actually being teacher driven. So when you're taskmasters, you find yourself many times increasing your teacher talk. But when your expectation is based on your beliefs, okay, then what happens is you reduce your teacher's talk because your instruction becomes student driven. There's one of Ritchart colleagues, Perkins, has something called action theory. And action theory, teachers must guide their beliefs not through practices, but on actions, on what the student can do, what the student can produce as a result of asking the right questions, as a result of giving the appropriate amount of time. In Saudi Arabia, what I find is there's too much emphasis on practices. There's too much emphasis. Teachers want to get a CELTA, they want to get a TESOL, they want to get a master's, they want to go to a workshop and find the latest and greatest skill, and that's fine. I promote continuous education. I promote professional development. However, if we look at John Hattie's research on visible learning, what we find is that professional development is a very low impact activity as it relates to its influence or its effect on learning. So what we do know is that when teachers ask the right questions, when teachers collaborate one another and have a culture of thinking in their department, in their schools, John Hattie tells us that's a high impact activity. That's an activity that promotes cultures of thinking. The other problem with being the teacher who is her expectations is based on directives or being the taskmaster is that when you become the taskmaster, you then put a lot of value on grades. And this is a big misconception. And again, it's that productivity perspective. We see the students being quiet. We see the students doing work. We see the students listening to the teacher. So obviously that teacher is a good teacher and is promoting thinking and is promoting learning, which is not necessarily the case. Because what happens is when you're the taskmaster teacher, when you're the teacher that focuses on directives, giving orders and giving instructions, not only do you have an increased teacher talk and the instruction is teacher driven and not student driven, what happens is you end up robbing the students. You end up forcing the students. You end up basically bullying the students with grades. So, the taskmaster teacher says things like, if you don't be quiet, I'm going to give you a quiz. All right? If you continue to talk, I'm going to take 5 points off. Okay? This is what the taskmaster teacher does. And we all had that type of teacher who threatened us by giving us a quiz or taking grades out of the grade book or off of a test, a future test. Okay, and students, learners, then are pressured, are forced, are bullied into compliance. And when we know that when a student is bullied or pressured, that information does not go to the thinking part of the brain. It does not go to the frontal lobe. It goes to the non-thinking part of the brain. It goes into short-term memory, which if you're the directive teacher, you're okay with short-term memory because you're more happy. You're concerned about the student doing well on the test, the quiz, the exam. You don't really care about what happens. You don't really care about what happens when he moves on to the next grade. The belief teacher is not only cares about what happens when that student goes to the next grade, but cares about what happens when they go to the next school, when they go to college and university, when they get their first job, when they have their first child, when they progress in life. So this is a difference in the directive, the taskmaster teacher, and the teacher that is driven based on beliefs. Okay, so robbing your students, and in the APEA group, I think we kind of talked about that yesterday. This idea of robbing students, this idea of giving candy or rewards to get students to do certain things. There's no real value in doing that. Yes, the student may comply for that class period or for that last 10 minutes or for that short term, but that compliance is very temporary. It's not permanent. Our job is to get students to have self-efficacy, to promote lifelong learning, to have students who are responsible for their own learning, to have students who are self-motivated, to do it because they want to do it, not because you are going to give them an extra 20 points on the quiz or that you're going to have a pizza party on Friday. This is not good strategies. And again, I'm a fan of giving students rewards. I'm a fan of behavior modification, but not as a bribe. Normally when I give students a reward or I give them a treat, they don't even know it's coming. Or it's part of a behavior modification program that's extended. And there's a lot of hurdles they have to go through. So there's not an immediate reward or immediate satisfaction. It's extended out. In order to get to it, they have to do a series of things, which eventually they even forget about as they're doing it and becomes a part of the culture. So bribing students is the act of the taskmaster teacher. If you do this, I'm going to give you an additional 20 points on your quiz. If you do this, we're going to have a pizza party on Friday. Again, this does not promote self-efficacy. does not promote lifelong learning and students taking responsibility of their learning. So when you promote this idea of the directors and you have the expectation of directors, basically what you're telling the student is, or the mode or the perspective that you're using in your teaching is that you want students to acquire a set of knowledge. Okay, and so this is one of the problems with Common Core and how people understand and perceive Common Core. And Common Core is the American standards, right? The problem with Common Core is you'll find that schools will rush to get through all of the standards, right? They say, "Oh, we covered all the standards. We covered every last standard, so therefore we're fine. We're good. We covered the standards. The students have been taught that. We taught that to the students. We covered it. We gave some assessments, and so move on to the next grade if you did well, right? And that is a theory of, or the expectation of directives again, trying to get through all of those standards, or what a student should know per grade, versus making sure the students actually understand that information that you covered, those skills and those points of knowledge that you covered. Make sure that the student understands. So we have to be very, very careful when we look at things like Common Core. And I think Common Core has a lot of value. It sets a framework, but it should not be the crux in which you teach your students if you're teaching an American program or any standard. Okay, it's a suggestion. It's not the Bible. The gospel is understanding. This is what we get paid to do as educators, is get students to understand and be responsible for their own understanding. Okay? And this is why I always promote personalization, conceptualizing, and contextualizing lessons. Okay? Because these things help promote student learning, student-driven learning. So again, in Saudi Arabia, there's a big focus on weekly plans. So there's an extreme focus on the weekly plan. And again, that's the directive teacher, that's the taskmaster teacher, that's the perspective of the taskmaster school. Get through the weekly plan. And what happens is, instead of creating a culture of thinking, what we have created is a culture of work in Saudi Arabia. Okay, we have created a culture of work, and the parents are now so in tune in this culture of work that they perceive this as learning. They perceive this as how learning looks like, what learning looks like, and the reality is not what learning looks like. Okay, what we're doing when we put so much emphasis on weekly plans is that we are encouraging our students and our parents and the community at large to just get through the process, just get to work. Okay, I just want to get through the day. What do I have to do, teacher? How long is this going to take? How about this one? How many words do I have to write, teacher? I got to write. How many words do you want? How many sentences do you want, teacher? Right? When you're trying to promote the writing process, right? You can't get them to write a good brainstorm or write good, because they just want to get it done. It's about productivity, because we promote that. So when they turn in a product that is not acceptable, then we want to get mad, but we're the ones that promoted it because we rushed through the process and we were so focused on the task, right? Because in the weekly plan or in the 15-week plan, it says that we were going to have the students write 5 writing prompts. So we're more concerned about them writing the 5 writing prompts, which may not be quality, instead of focusing on them writing 2 excellent writing prompts. Okay, it's okay to have an expert to say, okay, it'd be nice to get the 5, Okay, it'd be nice to get the 5. However, if I can get 2 really good, outstanding writing prompts, extended responses, or brief constructed responses, that's even better. That's where I want to go, where a student is utilizing the writing process. All right, they're starting off with the brainstorm and the outline, and they start to draft their process up. And they say, teacher, don't give me another day on that deadline, teacher. Give me another day because I'm still on my 4th draft, and I got another idea I want to put in. That is what promotes thinking. That is where we want to be. But no, so often we set up our structures to say, okay, this is due on Wednesday. Okay, this is due on Friday. Okay, and if you don't turn it in, what happens? Taskmaster teacher says, I'm going to take 5 points off for every day that is late. Okay, and again, timeliness has a value. Don't get me wrong. Timeliness does have a value. However, at what point do we discount and devaluate understanding? So how many students throughout the world went through 12 years of writing in their educational career, and they get to college and they have to take remedial writing, or they have to take a grammar class? How many? There's too many people. Why? Because most teachers are the taskmaster teacher. They have the expectation that's set on directives. And in order to have a culture of thinking, we need to move away from that. Instead of focusing on the lesson plan, what we need to be focusing on is instead of focusing on the weekly plan, what we need to be doing is focusing on the lesson plan. Moving away from knowledge acquisition to promote independent learning. Okay, not passive learning. And what's happening in many, and not to pick on Saudi Arabia, but what's happening in many places in the world, even in developed countries, is teachers are focused on passive knowledge or passive learning, where the student sits, listens, and does work. It's about productivity. Okay. So how do we get active learners? How do we create active learners? Okay. How do we go about the business of creating active learners? So Ritchart tells us that there's 5 belief sets that we should think about when we're talking about cultures of learning as it relates to expectations. There's 5 belief sets of expectations. 1 is focusing students on learning versus work. Now, Zorin talked about work. Okay, learning versus work. So we're going to talk about that. 2, teaching for understanding versus knowledge. And we talked about that a little bit already. 3, encouraging deep versus surface learning strategies. Okay, deep, going deep in our teaching. Okay, instead of surface, rushing through the curriculum, those rushing through the weekend plans, so we can stay on task, so we can make parents happy. Because although the students didn't learn anything, everyone's happy that you are on the correct pacing. Okay, we have to move away from that. That's not cultures of thinking. And what we're doing is we're promoting students who have a work mentality instead of a understanding mentality, a thinking mentality. 4, promoting independence versus dependence. So the taskmaster teacher is really promoting passive students who are dependent on the teacher. Therefore, the teacher has a lot of talking to do. Okay? If it's not the beginning of the unit where you have to doing a lot of conceptualizing and personalizing for the students, as that unit moves on, you should be reducing your teacher talk. You should find that every day, as you move closer and closer to the end of the unit, that you're saying less and less words. By the end of the unit, you're almost a mute. You're almost not saying anything. You're just there. You become a facilitator instead of the teacher. Instead of the educator, you become a facilitator because the students are now flying on their own, practicing on their own. Okay. And then number 5, we have developing growth versus a fixed mindset. And so in Saudi Arabia, I see that many schools in my travels as a consultant, I see many schools that just have a fixed mindset, who just happy just to get by. They've been doing it this way for 20 years, and it's worked this way, and the parents are happy this way. And if you talk about growth, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And we have to understand that it's through growth that we innovate, and without innovation, we all will eventually become extinct. So you can look at that from a human standpoint or from a business standpoint of schools. So basically, when we talk about thinking and expectations, we have to understand that it's our expectations that are really the core of cultures of thinking. It's our expectations that are belief driven. That they're belief driven. Because they are belief driven, we act. We create actions because we're inspired by our beliefs. We have these. We have 22 aspiring youths who are going to take on the challenges of the 21st century. And we have a belief, and we want them to be thinkers, and we want them to be creators, and we want them to be analyzers and synthesizing information. And so because of these beliefs that we have, we create actions, and we do actions that drives our thinking and it drives our teaching, because we are so inspired by those youths, and we're so inspired about them tackling on the challenges of the 21st century. Okay. That we start to ask questions like why and how does that work, and what do you think about that, and what does your action neighbor, what he thinks about that, and can we look a little bit deeper in that, and what do you think somebody 50 years ago would say about that, right? When we have a belief system that is based on this idea of understanding, our acts are related to that. When we have a expectation, a directive mindset as it relates to expectation, then we ask students to do work. You see the difference? When you have a mindset of a teaching mindset of directives, you ask students to do work. So your actions are what? The worksheet, right? Your actions are what? Reading the textbook, reading out loud in the book. Your actions are what? Answer the questions at the end of the story, right? Your actions are what? We're going to do a quiz. We're going to take a quiz. Your actions are what? We got a unit test coming up. Your actions are what? Sit down and be quiet. These are your actions because you have a directive mindset. And directive mindsets means that you're asking students to do work. It's not about them. It's not about them conquering the challenges of the 21st century. You get what I'm saying? It's not about them. Please let me know that you guys are alive here. It's not about the students' personalized lives after they leave you. It's not about how well and what type of people they're going to be, and how well they gauge to society, and how they're going to change the world, how they're going to be the leaders of the world 20 and 30 years from now. Okay, when you have a directive mindset, it's about getting through this class, it's about getting good grades, it's about turning that paper in, it's about doing that worksheet, it's about doing your homework, and it's my homework stuff. Why didn't you do my homework? Why didn't you do the worksheet that I created? It's all about you, the teacher, when you have that directive mindset. Okay? But if you have that mindset of expectation of beliefs, that, these are youths that are going to take on the world, then what happens, your actions become different. Your actions become about the student. You don't care about that homework per se. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean, I'm not saying don't assign homework. please do not misunderstand what I'm saying here. I'm not saying do not assign homework. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that homework doesn't have any value. Please understand what I'm saying. Please do not misinterpret what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we must put our value on the things that are most important. And the things that are most important are acts that are student-driven, that relates to them and how they will move forward in their life. Acts that promote understanding. Acts that promote thinking. Now, here's another thing that we need to think about as teachers. Every school doesn't have the same pedagogical philosophy or approach. So you may be currently in a school that either has a directive mindset, and you have to ask yourself, do you want to stay in that school, stay being employed in that school that has a directive mindset? Because all that's about is work and production. And it's not about thinking. It is not about the student being a productive member of society, a future leader of the 21st century. And you have to ask yourself. So when things happen in that school, you can't complain. Because this is the way they're going about the business of their school. Or you can try to be a change agent. And you have to understand, if you try to be a change agent, then you're going to be very frustrated. Because change is hard and difficult. Unless you start your own school. So when you go out to apply for schools and you go out to find employment in schools, you have to really ask them about their educational beliefs. What are their expectations they have for students? Is it a directive mindset or is it a belief set mindset? And you have to make the decision. Okay? That's just a reality. Because that's really going to really hamper how you do your business and the beliefs that you have. Okay. So you have to think about that as you take on different responsibilities and take on employment with different companies. So let's look really briefly into learning versus work. So when we look at the terms in our schools, when we look in the terms in the schools, thank you, Miriam. You have to be a change agent, or you have to leave that school. Okay, because you're just going to be frustrated, and they're not going to understand you, and they're going to say, "Why aren't you following your weekly plans? Why are you following your weekly plans?" And the parents are going to be like, "We don't like this teacher because they're not following their weekly plans. They're not going about the business of work." Okay, guys, we're not in the Victorian period anymore. We're not in the Industrial Revolution anymore. Okay, we're in a post-capitalistic world. We're in a knowledge-based society. The students that you're teaching are going to be working in a different type of environment where knowledge is king. Not work. Knowledge. And they have to take their knowledge, their deep understanding of how to do something, and how to manipulate, and how to create, and how to analyze, and how to synthesize information, data, to create something. This is how they will put food on their table. Soon there will be no more 9-to-5 work. Everything will be based on one's ability to create. And that people are going to be able to do that from the convenience of their own homes. So we're teaching students, we're teaching learners who are going to be engaged in a totally different economic, financial, and work climate. So we have to move away from this. So, but in our schools, what are the terms that we use? We use terms like classroom management, instruction, worksheets, the owner of the school, the CEO, we got managers, we have coordinators, schedules. We run our schools like work. We don't run our schools with a mindset of deep understanding. And the problem with, you say, well, Mr. Ray, what's the problem with using worksheets and using, having managers and coordinators. What happens is when you use those terms, they help manipulate your actions. They help, they influence how you go about the business of your day. They focus on productivity. When you start talking about managers, when you start about do this worksheet, we do this homework, work assignment. Stop talking and do your work. And then we understand. Then we wonder why students get bored. We wonder why students are not engaged. I mean, how many people on this online right now enjoy going to work, to doing work? No, you may enjoy creating things. You may enjoy the intellectual part of what you do, especially if you have a deep understanding or deep understanding of what you do, and you can create things, and you can manipulate things, and you can adjust things, and you can analyze things, and you have that freedom and you have that autonomy. But most of us don't. We have a manager over us watching us, and that's not enjoyable, is it? And how much do you learn at work when you have that type of, that you live in that type of environment, or you work in that type of environment? But we do the same thing with our kids and our students, our learners, and then we expect them not to learn. We expect them to learn in that environment when it's boring, and it doesn't meet their amygdalas. It doesn't speak to what's in it for me. All right, and then we wonder why their behavior problems. We wonder why they fight with us. They fly away from us. All right, or they freeze on us. They go to sleep on us. We wonder why we say something 20 times and the students don't get it. Because you're not personalizing your instruction, because it's about work, and no one likes work. So we have to be student driven if we're talking about a culture of thinking. Think for a second. Think about a time when you ask a person to do something, and they did what you asked them to do, but it's not what you intended for them, or it's not what you intended out of what you asked them. So they actually did exactly what you asked them to do, but you didn't get the intention of what you wanted to happen. Didn't happen. Why? Because they will mainly focus on the task and not on the intentions. And when you're a teacher that is, your expectations is driven on beliefs, it's about the intentions, it's about the motive. It's like a good detective, right? What is a detective concerned with? A detective is concerned with motive. This is how he catches the criminal, based on the motive. The motive. But as teachers, we don't focus on motive. We focus on what? Getting through the day. If we were police officers, if we were detectives, we would arrest anyone. This is about just the production, instead of trying to find the true assailant. So let's talk about point number 2, and I'm going to let you go in about 10 minutes here. Teaching, understanding versus knowledge. So the way I look at this is that knowledge is storage, and there is a difference between knowledge and understanding. Okay, and here's how Ritchart explains it, and this is how I'm going to try to explain it in my own words. Knowledge is the storage of information. So if anyone ever put anything in storage while they were away or if they moved, storage is a temporary concept. When you store something away, it's always a temporary act. We never intend something to be stored forever. All right. We say we're going to come back to it later. We're going to use it, okay, at another time. So it's a temporary act. Okay. Whereas understanding is an act of that you hold on to, that you don't put in storage. Because you value it. Because you understand it enough that it's so valued that it has to travel with you. So this is the concept of lifelong learners. This is what we what we mean by lifelong learning, or self-efficacy. Students taking responsibility for their learning. Right? Is that they value what they have so much that they don't want to put it away in storage. It's not in their short-term memory. It's going to be in their long-term memory because it's personalized, it's conceptualized, it means something to them. The context is there, the understanding, the situation is there. They understand there's something in it for them. There's something in it for them. So they don't put it in storage. But what happens is, when you're the directive teacher and your expectation is just to get through the content, what happens is your students put it in their short-term memory. They put it in their short-term storage facility in their brains. They remember it enough to take the test, to take the quiz, then they stop paying the storage bill. And we all know what happens when you stop paying the storage bill. Right? Your stuff gets thrown away. And that's what happens. They just throw it away because it's not that valuable to keep with them. Okay? So that's kind of my explanation of knowledge versus understanding. So when we promote understanding, we have to understand, we have to take time. And again, this is anti-weekly plan. This is anti-pacing. That we have to go beyond the text. We have to go beyond the surface of what we're teaching to make sure the student understands so he can create. He can move up Bloom's taxonomy. Another example I want to give real briefly is, you ever been to a city? You've been to that city a couple of times, or you've been to that place a couple of times, okay? And you have an understanding of how to get to certain places, how to get to the airport, how to get to the hospital. You have a kind of an understanding of it, but you're not really sure. And I guess the best example in that same context would be women in Saudi Arabia. Women in Saudi Arabia, they don't drive to this point. Right now, currently, they don't drive. In the future, they will. However, right now, when women, when they finally get behind the wheel of the car in a couple of months, okay, they won't be able to find their way anywhere, and they may have been in the kingdom for years, or born and raised in Saudi Arabia. But when they get behind that wheel of the car, they won't be able to find their way home initially. Why? They have a knowledge of where they live. They know they live in Salamanea. They know they live in Yasmin. They know they live in Yarmouk. Okay, they know they live in these different neighborhoods, and they kind of understand how to get there, but they're not quite sure. So when they get behind the wheel of the car, there's going to be a lot of lost folks if they're not using their GPS. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of lost folks, even though they may have been born and raised in the kingdom. Why? Because for so long they had a driver. They sat in the back seat, and they understood that they were in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. They understood what neighborhood they lived in. They kind of had an understanding of where certain things were. Okay, but they had the knowledge of it, but they didn't have a true understanding. Because when you have a true understanding, you get behind the wheel of the car and go from point A to point B. Okay, so hopefully that kind of clears up this idea of knowledge versus understanding. All right, kind of gave you a Saudi context there. So as teachers, we have to really promote this idea of understanding, and it takes time. And just as the driving analogy, students have to practice. We have to give students the opportunity to try it out and to practice. Okay, and look at things from different perspectives. Okay, instead of taking Ring Road all the time, how about you take another route? How about you go eastbound this time? Or how about you take Corres Road? Okay, well, how about you take Abdulaziz, King Abdulaziz? Try it from this way. Don't take the same route all the time. Okay, you always take Ring Road over. This time, take Mecca Road or take Jeddah Road. See how long it takes to get there. See what the differences in traffic the differences in traffic are. Okay? That promotes understanding and not knowledge. Knowledge would just be, okay, give me a route to get from Memlaka Tower to Saudi German hospital. Okay. Understanding would be, okay, now you know that one route to get from Memlaka Tower to Saudi German hospital. Now let's take several routes. Okay. Try to. Now I'm going to put you here. I'm going to put you at Kingdom Hospital. Now try to get to German Saudi Hospital. See if you have an understanding, and let's play with it. And it's okay to get a little lost. And I'm here to help you out if you get lost. I'm there to support you. But go and get lost. Okay. One of the interesting things is that we're starting to understand that in early childhood development, what we're finding is that it is just as valuable for kids to just go outside and play. So in places in Europe, like in Sweden, they have what they call kindergarten classrooms, where there's no ABCs or 1, 2, 3s. It's just kids going outside and playing in nature, and they climbing trees, and they digging in the dirt, and they socializing with one another, and they're just enjoying nature. And what they found is when the kids go into first grade, they're on the same level as the kids who went through an early childhood development program. All right? Why? Because the experience is much more valuable. You're getting out there and just trying it, doing it, practicing it. All right? With obviously supervision, but kind of a passive supervision. Okay? So when we talk about understanding, there's a couple processes that we can take hold of, or that we can acknowledge. One is going over general topics, which is the curriculum itself, what we already do, and then establishing goals of understanding. So moving away from student will be able to complete a worksheet to a set of small goals talking about how and why. So goals that allow students to explore, if you will. Okay? And then an assessment of the performance of that understanding. Okay? And these assessments don't have to necessarily be paper and pen. Okay? And then the last step is ongoing feedback. Ongoing feedback. I'm reaching 9:59. I'm not due all of the chapter, but I don't want to take all you guys' time. So I think I'm going to wrap it up. I went through about three quarters of the chapter on chapter 2. I want to respect everyone's time. I hope someone got something out of that talk. You can follow up in the chapter. There's only a couple more pages left if you want to go over deep versus surface understanding and independence versus dependence. But I think we hit some major points today as it relates to expectations in chapter 2. Thank you, everyone. If anyone has any questions, I'll stay behind and answer any questions about the chapter or anything as it relates to teaching. Everyone else, I look forward to seeing you this Saturday from 1 to 3 o'clock at Dome International School Exit 5, where we will do our November APEA meeting, and we'll be Dr. Anderson will join us to go over a more structured talk on Cultures of Thinking, Chapter 2. I've already put his minutes up in the slideshow that he will present. Also, I will be putting my minutes up for the housekeeping issues and the business of APEA. Thank you, everyone, for your time. God bless you. Be someone's champion. I'll stay behind for any questions. Thank you, everyone.